Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Two Rivers Tuesday. I almost forgot what this was called. I'm here with John T.
A little
Welcome.
rusty. Yeah.
Yes, I was like, think fast. All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope everybody's having a great summer. Are you having a good summer, John?
Having a great summer. It's been really good. It's been like kind of busy, but in like some good ways.
That's great.
Yeah.
Y'all
How
went
about
to
you?
the beach?
We did.
And
we
you
did
went
go
camping?
to the beach. We've been camping and we've been to the beach.
So
So
fun.
like I feel like we've covered it.
Yes.
You know, like, and those would probably be like my happy place and Katie's happy place,
That's great.
respectively.
Yes.
But I do love the beach, and we had a great time celebrating Katie's birthday at the beach.
That's awesome. Some of my favorite things this summer so far have been our driveway parties. They have been so fun.
I've heard so many good things about that.
Yes, yeah. So many slip and slides, so many kids, so many smiles. It's been really, really sweet.
The shaving cream war
Yes.
was one that I saw some pictures of. It was pretty epic.
Yeah, that was really, really fun. So looking forward to it. We have a couple more of those. If you haven't been out, check those out. And we also have on July 16th another game night coming up. And the last one was super fun. So
Game night for the ladies?
yes,
Okay.
ladies game night. Last time we played Bunko. I think Brittany Merchant is doing these. I think she's going to mix it up. So we'll see what we have this upcoming one. That'll be fun.
Brittany Merchant, she's like sneaky, like game host.
Oh, yes.
Like loves games.
Yes.
And it's pretty great.
Yeah,
I
great.
would imagine that would be a lot of fun.
Yes, she can do it. She can do it. All right. And then as promised, what is your favorite cereal?
So for all of you who weren't a part of that promise, before we started recording,
John's dying to talk about cereal.
somehow we got to talking about cereal, and I was like, let's talk about cereal on the podcast. That's why Maggie was like, but this is how Maggie delivered it. As promised, let's talk about cereal. John wants to talk about cereal.
Get excited.
Yay. Yeah. Well, you may not be excited about cereal, Maggie, but I get real excited about cereal. And we were talking about our favorite cereals. And did you have a favorite cereal? Because I know you don't really eat cereal now.
Yes, but I do have a favorite
Because you're a
cereal.
responsible adult.
Yes. Favorite unhealthy cereal is Cocoa Krispies. And it's like you have the chocolate milk afterwards, and it's so, so delicious.
So is that Rice Krispies? That's like chocolate Rice Krispies?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And they're very good.
Oh, wow.
And then a healthy cereal that I enjoy is Heritage Flakes with a sliced banana in the bowl. Okay, they are so crunchy. Let me tell you what's good about it. Let me sell you on it.
Heritage Flakes?
Yes.
Hold on. Like that just... Okay, so I've got a few things going on in my mind right now, but I feel like, I don't know why I'm seeing like an American flag. Like that should be like something, you know. Like,
I actually do feel like there's an American flag in the logo.
but I also wonder if like, but I could also see this like as a total generic knockoff of something.
I don't really know the roots of the brand, but it is so good. Let me tell you why it's good.
Heritage
the
Flakes.
crispiness remains in the flake for the duration of the eating experience. Okay.
It has a special coating, a special
Something.
polymer.
Well, it's just, there it is. Okay,
feel like-
Jesse just pulled it up for us. It has like 1 million different grains in it. It's so delicious. Always organic. It says 6 grams of fiber. It's
basically
so
something.
good.
Basically something you would hate if you were a child.
My children like it because it's like one of the only cereal they're offered.
the only thing they know.
But it's good. It's so crunchy.
Heritage Flakes. I
Everybody
just feel like, man,
go
I just
try
want
it.
some flakes off that Heritage. Like that's just such a funny name to me.
It's great.
That's your favorite. Well, I was gonna go with something a little more like Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
It's also delicious.
Very good. Definitely gonna win any kind of cereal tournament of champions. I
Yes,
think
as
at
it
the end of the
should.
day, Cinnamon Toast Crunch is still so great. Even, and I don't think I fully appreciated it as a child. Because I think I liked other things like Captain Crunch, but we talked about this off air that just destroys your mouth, and
Yes.
so like at the end of the day, it's not really
It's
worth
painful.
it, right?
It's so painful.
It's kind of like eating a Butterfinger, like it's just
Yes.
so hard and
Yeah,
crunchy.
it's like a
really
sharp
not worth
on the
it.
roof of your mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Cinnamon Toast Crunch, it's got enough crunch, but that cinnamon milk at the
Mm-hmm.
end is just, it's amazing.
Delicious. So everybody go get some
So
cereal
good.
after
Okay.
this. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm getting hungry.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump into the book, which is why we're here. All right.
That's why we're here.
Throughout the summer, we are reading Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer, and we have done a couple episodes just kind of discussing it. So if you missed those, you might want to look back at that. And we just encourage people to be either listening to the book or reading it because the book is really good. So we're
Yeah.
going to jump into the conversation. This week, we're talking about the second goal, which is to become like him. But before we jump into that a little bit more, can you, on the spot, give us a smidge of review? All right, I'm seeing that I will be giving this review.
Yes.
Okay, so the first two parts of the book talked about being an apprentice of Jesus. So just introduction to this idea that as followers of Jesus, our goal is to be with him, become like him, and do the things that he did. And being an apprentice of Jesus means you are following him so closely that you would be like covered in his dust, similar to this like rabbi illustration that was true in that time. And then the second one we talked about was being with Jesus. So this just this idea of abiding with him and making God a habit. So we just talked about like in those default waiting moments, where do our minds go, and trying to train our minds in returning to God and finding our home in God. And as we do that, we begin to become like him. So that's what we're going to talk about more today. And so this chapter is about becoming like him, and specifically talking through how we change or how we are formed. So it's about spiritual formation. And one of the things that he opens with is the skull. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
The skull. Well, I thought maybe you could describe the skull that's on your desk right now. He opens up the chapter talking about having a skull on his desk that reminds him that we're all going to die. Yeah, which is kind of a morbid thought, which also makes me think of What About Bob, the movie. No,
can't help you there.
Can't help me there. But there's this scene with Bob and this little boy, and they're like, "We're all gonna die."
Yeah,
and it's funny in the movie. It's morbid when you think about having a skull on your desk, but it's still true.
Yes.
And there's something about thinking about the end for us all that should, I think, motivate us to think about the kind of people that we are becoming.
Yes. Yeah. It reminds me of, I'm pretty sure we got this from the Feldman family, something that they tell their kids often, which like, it sounds shocking at first, but it's something we too have started telling our kids often, is like, everything is going to die and everything is going to break. And then my girls will go, except God. And so just like this idea that he's getting at in the book, and what we're trying to like instill in our children, is that like everything is created by God, and therefore like one day will like some things are going to break and some things are going to die, and like just kind of setting up the expectation that like nothing here is going to satisfy you or going to last in the way that God will and can. And also when you kind of have this like reminder that like death is real, it puts everything in this life into proper perspective. And so the reason he's addressing this in the book is because we so often, I guess, kind of live in denial of our death, or like want to escape that reality or want to gloss over it. But when like we feel that like that's coming and it's real, it makes us want to get serious about the kind of person we are here in this life. Is that kind of what he's getting at?
I think so. And he goes on to talk about, he starts talking about resume virtues versus eulogy virtues, and the things that we put on our resumes right now, they're often very different than the things that are said about us in our eulogy. And in fact, when I was reading back over this to kind of review for this conversation, I was thinking about something that someone in our church family was sharing with us in our pre-service prayer meeting. Jesse's been having the worship team share some of their gospel threads, and so one of our brothers was talking about the way his dad, who passed away recently, was eulogized, and he was not using this exact language from the book, but it was exactly what he was talking about. He was thinking about, so like our brother was thinking about the things that are on his resume right now, but he was listening to people talk about things that were about his dad. Those were eulogy virtues of a life well lived and loved, or loving people, serving people, being faithful, and like those are the things that that's who we want to be. That's who we want to become. So I think that's That's why he began with the skull.
Yes, and we won't become those things accidentally.
That's right.
And that's what this whole chapter is about, is like we have to put intention into becoming that kind of person, because if we don't, we'll miss it. We'll totally miss it. And so I think we have to think through, okay, what can I be doing now to become the type of person that at my funeral they will say, she loved Jesus, she was loving, she was peaceful, she was patient, all of those things. And so that's what this chapter is getting at. And he also makes the point that this being formed, spiritual formation, is not a Christian thing, that we are all being formed. And this is kind of been a similar idea throughout the book of like, we are all abiding in something. We're all being formed by something. We're all a disciple of something. Yeah. So if you look at your life, like, there are factors that are forming you, and we just have to put intention and discipline into thinking through how those things are forming us.
Yeah. And on page 71 of the book, if you have the book, there's the top, I bracketed this kind of top half of the page. I just wrote, this feels important, because he says spiritual formation is not optional. That's what you're talking about. And he goes on to say, we are being either transformed into the love and beauty of Jesus, or malformed by the entropy of sin and death.
Yes.
We are all going to die. We are decaying and working our way toward that. And so we'll either be kind of malformed into death, or we'll be transformed into life.
Yes. Yeah. I've heard him talk too about, like, if you think about people who are like in their 90s, they're not, what he said is mid. They're not like right. neutral. Like, yes. Because they've had a lifetime to be formed in one of those directions, it's very clear which direction they went. So they're either some of the most loving, most gentle, most God-fearing people or sometimes, no disrespect, but sometimes people in their 90s, you see that like the trajectory they were on led them to be like harmful and sour and like difficult. Yeah. And so it's like, okay, which direction are you going in? And it just like becomes more and more apparent the longer you live your life, which is an interesting thing to think through.
It is an interesting thing to think through. And I just really hope that I don't become a grumpy old man.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. But for real, like, I feel like it is easy to see how sometimes that is a trajectory that people are on, and the like sadness and like the collateral damage that can bring, versus if you think the opposite, think of that older person, that's in their 90s, like all of the fruit of their life that can be enjoyed by so many people is beautiful.
Yeah.
All right. So he gives a helpful definition of like what formation is for following Jesus. And he says the process of being formed into people of love in Christ. And he kind of breaks this down into parts. So the first one is the process, and it's just helpful to acknowledge how painfully slow this can be. And because of that, it can be super easy to get frustrated, but also because of that, I feel like it's so helpful and fruitful to think of like yourself right when you came to know Jesus, and then think of like who you are now. And you can be like, okay, like he is working. I am changing. So I think it's just this tension between like, I'm not where I want to be, but praising God for like what he has done in you. And then the next part is of being formed. So it's just like, God is the one that is doing the forming, and then into people of love. So we can kind of park here for a minute, because I think this is the piece of the definition that makes it different than the way the world is being formed, or the way the world wants to form you. Because we have all seen, like, there's no shortage of like Project Self and self-help and 10 ways to be better, this life hacks, like all of that kind of stuff is everywhere. And so, but what's distinct about the like formation that Jesus wants to do in us is that he wants to form us into people who are more loving. And so that is the test of like, if you're becoming more like Christ or not, is if you're being more loving. And so just question for you, is it easier to love the people that you see for like a few hours a week, or easier to love well the people that are with you all the time, so like your wife and kids?
Oh gosh. I feel like that's a leading question, counselor. I would say that it's probably easier to love, and I put that in air quotes.
Yes.
People that I see a few hours
Yes.
a week, or that I'm like, sort of like, I'm put here to love them because I'm a pastor,
Yes.
for instance,
Yeah.
and it's a lot harder sometimes to love the people that are closest to me, all around me.
Yes.
That takes more of me.
Yeah. I'll flip it on myself and just admit, yes, like what you're saying, like if anybody's going to get like the brunt of my sin and the ways I haven't been formed into the image of Christ, it's my family, the people that like see the impatience, see the anger, see the selfishness, like, and so therefore when I'm trying to think through like, am I being formed more and more into a loving person? It wouldn't be fair for me to be like, well, how did I treat the girl I went to coffee with for 1 hour? I was so loving to her.
Yes.
She was easy to love.
I
Great.
bought
I'm
her
doing
coffee.
awesome. Yes. But the harder question is like, am I becoming more loving to the people that live with me, to the people that work with me and that I'm like around all the time that can get on my nerves and sin against me and I sin against them?
Dang
so
it.
that's the good question to ask.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the second part, or the last part, is in Christ. So it's just this idea that like it is in Him that this formation is happening. And so this is where we get into the piece of like, well, who's doing the work?
Yeah.
So he has this quote about, I think it was from Augustine. He says, "Without Him, we can't, and without us, He won't." So talk a little bit about like God's role in our spiritual formation versus our own personal role in our spiritual formation.
Yeah. I'm thinking right now about the story I told recently in the sermon on the Battle of Jericho. I was talking about Michael Jordan and Stacey King. And Michael Jordan scored 69 points in a game, and Stacey King, I think that's his name, scored 1 point in the game. Right. And he said to the reporters, "I'll never forget the night that Michael Jordan and I combined for 70 points." Right. Like he only contributed one of those. Right. It's a little bit like that. Like in our salvation, Jesus does all the work. He brought all the righteousness and he brought all the sacrifice that was required in order for us. Like we don't earn it. We don't have to. We're not trying to score enough points to get into heaven. Right. And yet we see that that our progressive, like our salvation that is being worked out in this life before it's like finalized, is a process that we are to participate in.
Yes.
And we see that really clearly in Philippians. And I can't remember if we talked about this on a previous podcast or not, but in Philippians, Paul tells the church at Philippi, like, hey, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. But then the next part's so important. For it is God who wills and works according to your good purpose.
Yes.
I may be butchering that right
sounds
now.
right.
But the point is, like, you are to work out your salvation, but it is God who is working it in you.
Exactly.
And so the answer is yes.
Yes, both.
It's both. But you can't work out your salvation without the power of God within you. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
But I think what Paul's trying to say is like, you have a part to play in this, right? Are you going to obey? Are you going to follow? Are you going to listen? Are you going to trust? Now, it'll be really hard to do that / impossible to do that without the power of God within you. So he's going to work in you, but then you step into it. It's a weird, it's a weird
mystery
thing to even try to describe.
Yes. Yeah. And I feel like people either lean, if we're not careful, we can lean to either of those two extremes. So one extreme would be to say like, I do all the work. And so I'm going to try really hard.
Yeah.
I'm going to just like bootstrap it and discipline and do all the things. And like, I'm going to change myself. And so the danger there is like, first of all, that won't work because like apart from the power of God and like trusting, like we can't do it in and of ourselves. And then the second extreme would be like, I have no part to play. I'm going to sit back and just hope that God kind of zaps me and fixes some of this stuff in me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think it's a good question to ask, like, where do I lean on those two extremes? Like, do I tend to think I have the power to change myself? And if I try hard enough and just like grit through it, that I can? Or do I just kind of like in maybe laziness or apathy, take a back seat and just hope, well, eventually God will change this in me if he wants to, right?
Right.
So those are two extremes, and it can be helpful to kind of identify where you are on that and try to pray that the Holy Spirit leads you into the balance of knowing that like you put effort in, you trust him, and ultimately he does the work as you participate in his work.
Hey, before we move on from this, because
Yeah.
we may be moving on, but I might derail us for a second, because as you're talking about this definition of spiritual formation, right? The process of being formed into the image of Christ in love or for the sake of others, however it may be described. Comer mentions, I think it's around page 78, he says that without this for the sake of others or this love piece, our formation will devolve into private therapeutic self-help spirituality that is honestly just a Christianized version of radical individualism and not a crucible to burn our souls clean and forge us into the people of love like Jesus. That hit me in between the eyes. And I think that I have a tendency, if I'm, kind of left to my own self, to even just want my relationship with Jesus to be some very therapeutic thing that is just for me.
Yes.
And if we look at the Bible, what we're seeing is that we're being formed in more and more into the image of Jesus. So in just one simple way to say this is I should be being formed more and more into a person who will willingly go to the cross and die.
Yes.
And that's not a therapeutic version of this world of self-help and make you your best self so you can live your best life and all this kind of stuff. You know, I mean, like there's a lot of good that comes, there's a lot of good work that goes on in our souls and in our minds and freeing us from lies and shame and giving us peace that comes with knowing Christ. Right. But at the end of the day,
that's not the goal.
And the goal isn't just so that we can kind of like, because that's just kind of like, I'm going to live my life and my Jesus kind of like work on me. But it's like, no, Jesus is working on you so that you will like love, you'll serve others. You'll give yourself away.
Yes.
That's what Jesus did. That's the goal.
Yes. And that's where true life is found. And I think it is just like, what is the question I'm asking? Like, cause I think so often the world is telling us, and the self-help empire is telling us to ask the question like, am I happy? Is this relationship fulfilling me? Am I becoming more self-aware? Am I like at peace in who I am? Like all of those questions are what like it's pushing you to ask yourself as like the primary important questions. And so that's why asking yourself the harder question of like, am I dying to myself? Am I becoming more loving? Would my spouse say I'm more gracious than I used to be? Would my kids say I'm more gentle than I used to be? Like those are the questions that we should be asking, not like, am I happy? You know?
Yeah.
And so, but those are different questions. And one, the like better questions of like, am I dying to myself? Am I becoming more loving to my family? Those are the questions that actually can lead to true joy and true life on the other side. The other ones will not.
That's right. That's right.
All right. I'm ready to move on. Are you?
Let's move on.
All right. So he has a couple of losing strategies. Like these things won't work. We kind of talked about the first one is just like willpower. Like you cannot habit stack your way into becoming more like Jesus. The second
Life
one, yes, the second one is like getting a zap from heaven, which we kind of also talked about, of just like hoping that God will zap you and fix it. The third one is interesting. It's more Bible study. And so this one, when I first read it, I'm like, wait a minute. Because Prophet, Priest, King, which is an assessment we have talked about, is like, the way I'm wired as a prophet is that I think truth will fix it always. And so if somebody's having a problem, or if I'm having a problem, you just need more truth. If you want to be formed more and more to the image of Jesus, you just need more Bible. Like truth is always the answer. And it's frustrating when that doesn't always work. Okay. And so what this chapter is kind of getting at is like, yes, that's one of the pieces in play in spiritual formation, but there are other pieces in play as well. And so he talks about that, which is how do we really change? And he has several things that he talks through. One of them is like truth or teaching, which is the more Bible study piece that like is a good factor that is part of it. The other one is the practices, then community, the spirit, time, and suffering. So there's these 6 things. So let's kind of park in a few of them. One of them is community. So just looking at the power that like community and relationships can have on your spiritual formation. And in particular, one of the things he says is that like the power of staying that can be such an important factor in your spiritual formation. So like how deeply forming it is to stay at this church. Like when it gets messy, when there's preferences that you don't like, when someone hurts your feelings, when it's not easy, like choosing to stay in this community is so forming to you. Choosing to stay in your marriage when it's difficult, choosing to stay in that friendship when it's hard, like that staying relational power is a huge factor in forming us. Yes. So, and then another one is suffering. So just like we have probably all experienced like the specific way that suffering can change us. But this chapter is just super helpful in going through some of those things that actually do change us. But what are some of your thoughts on like why it's not just read the Bible more and eventually that'll do its job?
Well, he quotes James K.A. Smith at some point in this section, who says, "You can't think your way into Christ-likeness."
Yes.
Right? Like, and
Are you sure?
What's that?
I said, are you sure? Like, I really feel like you should.
Yeah, I think I can. Well, that's because I am, at least the Enneagram has told me that I'm sort of in this like thinking triad, like the way I'm wired to think about things.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, I can think about it all day long, and I can think about how beautiful my wife is. But if I don't tell her, then like, like it got stuck in the brain, And if I don't tell my daughter how proud I am of her for something. Okay. So that's just a really, broad or simple example. But I think the reality is like, if all we do is just take in information and just think about it, be like, wow, that's really cool, that's really neat, but it doesn't like come out of us and change our behavior, then like we're not being fully formed, right? It has to come out.
Yes.
Right? I think I'm saying the obvious.
But that's great. Yeah.
It's not just about, that's why he's saying it's not just about, we can't just read our Bible.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, we've got to read our Bible and then pray and ask the Lord to take this thing that it's revealing something that's broken in me. And Lord, I want you to change me in that. And part of the ways that I'm going to change and be formed is to start practicing doing it differently.
Yes.
Yes. Whatever
exactly.
that is.
Yes. Yeah. And I feel like those practices move those truths into parts of like your being that simply reading it over and over again couldn't do.
Yeah.
And so he has this, what he calls the critical journey. And there's like a little picture of it in the book that kind of talks through these phases. And so I'm not going to get into that, but just that one of the ideas in that is that like there are stages in your discipleship, and especially in like the first stage of your discipleship. So think like I just became a Christian. In that stage of your discipleship, the Bible and more Bible study and more knowledge is going to be extremely critical in that stage. But then you come to this point in your discipleship where you have like been like immersed in like doctrine and scripture, and like so many of the like truths have washed over you, and mentally you kind of get it. And then you almost hit a wall to where like that can no longer like bring all the change that is needed. And so you are like, you need something outside of just reading the Bible over and over again and just memorizing more and more and more stuff. You need those truths to like be embodied in the practices, and you need other things to form you, not just read the Bible more. And so the reason I go into all that is because I have experienced in my own life, and maybe some of you have experienced, where you're like, I don't understand why I'm like reading the Bible every day. I'm like consuming so much teaching, but why am I still anxious? Why am I still angry? Like what can get at that thing in my heart? And so I think that realizing that like there are a lot of other like factors in spiritual formation, that when you like have a more holistic take on your formation, that's when you start to like enjoy and experience the freedom in some of those deep heart things.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And I'll just say maybe it in another way. Maybe I'm saying the same thing, but just in another way. It's like, I think we want, there may be some things that the Lord has told us to do that we just haven't done. And so it's one thing to kind of know what he's told us to do, but if we don't do it, then, you know, it's not his fault.
Yeah.
you know, like that you're not different.
Yes.
Like you haven't done what he's asked you to do.
Yes.
Right. And then just to talk about whether it's serving or whether it's community and the staying piece and the hard and doing hard things, you know, like I know we've talked about that on this podcast. Like just like serving in a ministry that's hard for you, that puts your selfishness onto the
crucible.
The crucible.
Yes.
Yeah. It kind of like puts it in front of the firing squad, so to speak, you know, like for instance, maybe it's serving in kids ministry on a Sunday, you know, like maybe that feels like that would be the hardest thing for you. Like, and that might be exactly what the Lord wants to use to form you, you know? And no matter how much you know about how thick the walls of Jericho were, right? Like, or how, like what the Greek word is for, you know, salvation, you know, like until you get on your knees and you begin to serve people who can't give you anything in return and who are going to like actually test your patience. Like there may not be a real forming in you. I'm just saying it in a different way.
So
it's
true.
the same thing.
Yes.
And so I think we don't like hard things though. We want God to teach us all the lessons without the hard things that go along with it. But think about some of the hardest lessons you've learned in life. That, you know, like those things, the way you've learned them is through those hard things, right? Like, it's not a pretty way to say it, but
no, that's good. Yeah. So I would just say like, think through like, what is that like thing in your heart that you feel frustrated by? And you're like, why is reading my Bible every day not fixing this thing in my heart? Well, what is the practice that God might be inviting you into, whether it's like Sabbath or fasting or serving or hospitality? Like how could leaning into your community and some of those practices actually be the practice that gets those truths into your body so that you can be freed from those frustrations in your heart? Because what the like, in closing, the like beauty and hope of this is that like we really can look more and more like Jesus. We really can be less angry. We really can be less anxious. We really can be more loving to our family. And so like, let's lean into our part to play in becoming more and more like Jesus.
Amen.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll be back in a little bit. Bye.